Hello and welcome to another episode number 70 of the History of Aviation podcast. I'm Derrick, Beeler, your host. And first off, I am joined by Mr. Dave Gorman. How's it going, Dave?
Hey, fellas, doing great. It's great to be able to welcome Julien to Tennessee, which I know you're going to talk about in a couple moments. So good to actually meet you, Julien, and have a meal with you last night. Things are going pretty well. We're excited to be back in school for the most part and get our second semester of seventh grade going. So all is well. To you guys.
All
Happy New
right, and
Year.
yes, sitting beside me is a weary traveler that has traveled Canada, California, and then back across the country over to East Tennessee. How's it going, Julian Martinson?
Hey, thank you for having me on the podcast this today. So I made a quick visit around the states, visiting family for the Christmas holidays, and I thought I'd make a little detour to Tennessee and visit my good friend Derrick. So I'm very pleased to be here because it's my first time in Tennessee, and I'm quite impressed.
How you liking it so far?
Well, I love it. It's great. The people are great. And as I was mentioning, everybody just calls me sweetie and darling all day long. And I'm just taking it in.
Well, there you go. We are glad to have you. And last but not least, David Rowe. What's going on, buddy?
Oh, nice and cold Canada weather you brought with you there, Julian.
brought it.
Thank you very much. All the way to Tennessee. So my skies are cloudy. I can hear things flying over, can't see anything flying over. So I've been working on a lot of Warbirds of Monroe air show videos of late. So we'll have some fresh videos up probably 1st of February or so. So that's what I'm working on is aviation videos.
Good deal. And David Rowe, this the subject we have picked today is something a little unorthodox than what we normally do.
Yeah, no doubt. This one is a little bit of a tragic story. Anytime that people lose their lives in aviation, it's a sad story. And this is a case of a very prominently well-known person that unfortunately passed away in a plane crash.
Yeah, on October 25th, 1992, and that would be professional golfer Payne Stewart, who won 11 times on the PGA Tour, 7 of which were international victories. 3 of those victories were majors: the PGA Tour Championship in 1989, the U.S. Open in 1991 and 1999. Stewart also played in 5 U.S. Ryder Cup teams: 1987, 89, 91, 93, and 99. So a very, very extensive golfing career.
Yeah, absolutely. Was extremely well known, particularly for his dress. While he was out there on the links, he wore clothing that was from the earliest days of golfing. The short leggings, the little flat hat, beret hat, colorful. Is to put it nicely. I read something that his children at one point, he was wearing an orange outfit and they called him a creamsicle. So
Yeah.
he was very visible on the golf course, was very famous. He was up there beating Phil Mickelson, so he's top of the PGA, and he was going to make a trip to the final event of the season in 1999. And unfortunately, he did not make it to that final golf tournament.
No, he really was, as you said, an exciting player to watch. His game was as good as his dress. He had a pretty big following, and people knew him. Uh, he because of the victories that Derrick had just kind of run down there a little bit, but also he had a whole lot of style. He was fun. He was a good guy, a great competitor, great reputation, family man. And just was a clean cut fella that really drew a crowd. So it's a shame that we recall this part of his life, but
Hmm.
while he was alive, there were a lot of things to be excited about with Payne Stewart. He really drew a crowd and really had quite a following that was growing at a time when golf maybe wasn't quite as ubiquitous as it was about to become, but he certainly was well known.
Yeah, definitely. And David Rowe, so October 25th, 1999, this day started pretty routinely, correct?
Yeah, it's the story of the day is pretty basic. You've got, they've got a Learjet waiting at the airport for them. You've got two pilots that, come in. I believe they got to the airport at like 6 in the morning, 7 in the morning. They prepped the jet, put snacks and drinks on it. They were in Orlando. They had to do a repositioning flight. And this all starts at about 9:09 in the morning when the plane they're in a Learjet 35, which is a very common, very there's 700 of them that have been built. They're very fast. Lots and lots of private folks use them, and so it's a perfect type of airplane. Seats 8 people. So it's perfect for small groups that are traveling across the country, which is exactly what Payne Stewart and his group were doing. They were leaving to go to Dallas to talk about building a new golf course. That's why these passengers were with Payne. We'll go through the list of who was on the plane a little bit later. But the plane leaves Orlando at 9:09 a.m. and it was just a routine flight over to what was it? I can't remember the name of the airport they were going to. It's a 15-minute flight, so they were going from I guess it was Sanford to Orlando, and so they get there. They pick up Payne Stewart, and there's 3 other people that are with him. So let me give you a quick rundown of the people that are on board here. So we know Payne Stewart, the PGA golf person. There's Robert E. Fraley. He is a former college quarterback at Alabama. His claim to fame, he actually beat Tennessee in 1974 in Knoxville. He was a CEO of Leader Enterprise, and he was basically a career manager, and so he helped manage Payne Stewart. Van Arden was also one of the managers that helped Payne, and there's Bruce Borland, who was a golf designer, golf course designer, and he was part of that entourage that was going to go work on this golf course in Dallas. And then there were 2, a pilot and a co-pilot, Michael Kling, who was a very experienced pilot. He formerly flew KC-135s for the Air Force, the E-3 Sentry. So he had a lot of flight time. I think he had over 4,000 hours of flight time. He'd been working for the company that the Learjet was owned by called Sunjet. And he'd been working for them for just a couple of years. He only had about 60 hours with Sunjet. And the co-captain was Stephanie Belgaray. And she was from El Salvador, first officer, 27, commercial pilot, flight instructor. So they had a very good crew on board for this flight. So they pick everybody up about 10:52 in the morning. And, well, let's see. Yeah, they left at 10:08 a.m. And, they're just flying on their way, and a ATC contacts them, and they respond at flight level 20,000 or so. And then about 6 minutes later, they try to contact them again, and there is no contact. There's no response. So within 6 minutes, something has happened,
Right.
and we don't know what that is.
And now we know that they were given a clearance to climb to altitude, and so
Yes.
they were in that climb, and they were tracking as going through that climb. But when ATC reached out to them again to just confirm, because they noticed them going off course a little bit, as you said, there was no response, which was very chilling because
That's not supposed to happen.
No, absolutely not.
They were visible. They were squawking, and at that altitude and moving along at a pretty good clip, but they definitely were not responding. And several calls had to just be absolutely chilling for the ATC personnel to wonder what's going on.
Well, from what I understand, ATC tried for several minutes with multiple calls, just over and over, trying to reach anybody in the jet, and they obviously got no response whatsoever. So at that point, you know, they don't know what's going on. So there just so happened to be an F-16 in the air from Eglin Air Force Base. It was on a test pilot was in it. Uh, and so they asked him, what was it, about 11:15? And they asked him to go check on this Lear N-47BA. Uh, he goes, flies up to it, and all he can see is frosted windows.
Mm-hmm.
So there's, the interior of the plane has all the condensation has frozen to the windshields. He can't see in. Apparently, there was a little tiny window right in the very middle of the front that you could sort of see in, but it's so dark inside. They just could not see what was going on. So he reported back.
They noted that there were no control inputs that were visible, no change in rudder or elevator position, anything like that. It just was appeared to be on autopilot without any input from the pilots at all.
Correct. It was climbing. Interestingly, it climbed up to 48,000 feet, which is just, I think the ceiling on that plane is about 40, and here it is at 48,000. So the autopilot was set on a course, and it was flying that course, but it was just climbing the whole time. So there was obviously nobody in control of that aircraft. So this is actually the first of 3 contacts that the F-16s had with it. So the first F-16 had to leave. He was obviously, just over there to check it out real fast. The FAA got in touch with 4 F-16s from Tulsa, Oklahoma, at about 11:59 a.m. They were getting refueling from a tanker, KC-135, and they got the F-16s to come over and do a fly around. And again, they saw the same thing that you said: frosted windows, no movement, no. The other thing that was interesting, there was no visible damage outside. So it didn't look like there was any kind of explosive decompression or anything like that you could visibly see, which is important because you want to find out what has happened. So it looked to them like the inside had, decompressed, but in 6 minutes, basically, from the time that they spoke till the time they didn't respond. It was only like a 6-minute, 20-second interval, which is incredible that can happen that fast.
I think one of the things that was also fascinating in a way was that this was a national news story as it was going on.
Mm-hmm.
I remember exactly where I was. In fact, I was at work at a restaurant in Knoxville, and we had TVs on in the bar area, and somebody said, "What's going on up here?" And so we watched it, and it was a very helpless feeling. And they're saying,
Mm-hmm.
there is no response. This plane is flying in a straight path. No, the no control inputs, as they said, and it was quite a mystery. That they were saying that it had been intercepted by fighter aircraft, and what was going to happen. It was an awful feeling, and they fairly early, it seems to be, they identified that Payne Stewart was aboard, and that was part of the crawl at the bottom of the screen. Learjet with Payne Stewart on flight. I forget how they described it, but it was pretty clear that it was a bleak prognosis.
Go ahead, Julien.
So, based on my experience as a flight attendant, you have an explosive decompression, which was mentioned earlier. So that is like a door or a window or part of the fuselage that opens, and the air just rushes out very quickly, and the oxygen masks would drop. But this was not the case. The Learjet has a type of a valve Maybe it's this big or smaller. And as the aircraft climbs, that valve closes, and so therefore the air inside the cabin stays inside. And so this valve was not functioning properly, and it stayed in the open position. And so as the aircraft climbed, air was slowly leaking out of the cabin and was replaced with the cold outside air that was also did not have the adequate oxygen levels that human beings require to live. And as I was discussing earlier, humans can survive at 10,000 feet in altitude, but as the Learjet passed that altitude, slowly, the cabin would be replaced with air that did not have enough oxygen to support human life. And so as it kept climbing, that air would slowly replace. And because you're all breathing the same air inside the cabin, you don't know from your colleagues if they are experiencing hypoxia. And so because the onset is very slow, you start by losing manual functions such as calculating or dropping papers and this kind of stuff, and you don't notice it from each other. And then as the minutes progress, then you lose complete consciousness, and then everybody in the cabin is basically dead.
Literally speaking, you don't know what hit you.
No,
It's
you just slowly pass away, and so there's a video on it, and you see people doing tasks such as finding their location on a map, and so those functions are okay. But as the aircraft climbs, as the minutes progress, those functions start to falling out, and then you drop your map, or you drop your briefcase or your papers or your cell phone, and you just go to, and then that's it, and you don't notice that it's that you're suffering from hypoxia. And so as flight attendants, we were trained to look out for that in one another for consciousness. However, because you're breathing the same air, how could you really look out for it? Because you'd all be experiencing the same symptoms. And so in a case of a rapid decompression, the oxygen masks would fall, and usually inside that there's oxygen for up to 10 minutes, which is just enough time for the aircraft to make a rapid descent where adequate oxygen, to continue flying at levels where adequate oxygen is available. So this is the cause of that accident. Now the question is, what caused that malfunction, and why did they not, were they not able to test that or identify that malfunction in this mechanism before departure?
I actually have a quick question on that. If something like that was slowly failing, even if the masks, the oxygen masks, came down, if something like that was failing, would that have even mattered, or is that a separate system?
So the oxygen masks inside the cabin are individually triggered, and so as the flight attendants instruct you, you have to pull the mask towards you, and in so doing, it pulls a pin, and that by pulling that pin out, it triggers the canister. It's a little box like this that produces oxygen individually for each person separately.
Okay.
Does a Learjet have that option like an airliner?
Well, it should have oxygen masks. Now, the question is, why do they not get deployed? And if they do get deployed and everybody's suffering from hypoxia, then how would you be able to put it on if you don't have those functions? So they have those oxygen hypoxia chambers. So you go in with a team, and they monitor you, and they give you tasks to do, such as coloring or word puzzles. And so in the beginning, you do those functions well, and then slowly you start fumbling over math problems, and then finally you drop.
You start acting like normal Derrick.
Well, exactly. You drop your pencil, and then at that moment, the instructor who's monitoring you gives you the mask, and you can breathe oxygen, and you recuperate the loss of oxygen. But if you're in that state for more than like 2 minutes, you're a goner. So that's you're toast.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the other question is that sometimes it's asked, do the cabin and flight attendants have the cabin flight crew, do they have the same oxygen and capacity? So if I recall, if I'm not mistaken, pilots, their oxygen masks may last up to 20 minutes, a little bit longer, but not much. So yeah, it's the flying high at high altitudes is an amazing experience, but it's not suitable for sustainable human life, and so oxygen is a critical component to making that travel journey a safe one.
Yeah, go ahead, David.
Yeah.
Back to the timeline.
Yeah, well, the hypoxia thing. Let's talk about it for just a second. Some of the symptoms are increased breathing rate, headache, lightheadedness, dizziness, tingling sensations, poor coordination, tunnel vision, and even euphoria. So all of these things affect everybody different. That's why you go into that test and have yourself tested so that when I suffer from hypoxia, this is how my body reacts.
This is what I do.
So, exactly. So you have, if you know that the person that you're with gets very euphoric when this starts to happen and they're acting euphoric, then that should be a clue that, put your oxygen mask on, immediately. But the problem is we don't know what happened inside Payne Stewart's jet. Right. We don't know how it happened, and we will never know. That's the mystery of the whole thing. Something happened. They lost consciousness. They never put on their mask. Whether the mask came down or not, we don't know, because from the wreckage of the jet, it was inconclusive. They couldn't find out. So that hypoxia is, it's a lack of oxygen in the body.
Mm-hmm.
As soon as you put your mask on and get the oxygen flowing, you recover really quickly. But from what I read, if it's an explosive decompression situation, within 10 seconds, you can pass out from lack of oxygen. So it's like an immediate thing if it's explosive. If it's that creeping, slow bleed, that bleed valve not working properly, that one is, you don't notice it until it's too late. So, that's the question, which, we assume that it was the slow bleed that got them. But anyway, back to the story. So we've got a couple of F-16s, a second pair of F-16s are trailing the jet. There's no response. They have to go tank. They're out of gas. So they head over to the tanker. About this time, a second set of F-16s scramble from Fargo, North Dakota. They reach the jet. They report the same thing as everybody else is reporting. So now, at this point, it's about 12:50 in the afternoon. This is about 2 hours since the jet's been in the air. And like you said, by this point, it's all over the news. Imagine if it was social media like it is today, X and Facebook and Snapchat, whatever, would be full of reports and people following along. This is, 1999. This is pre all that social media. So like you said, we were watching the crawl on CNN or the news channels. That's where you were getting your news about it. So about, 12:54 p.m., the Fargo F-16s intercept the Learjet. And again, no flight control movement. And, there's just nothing going on. So now it's just a matter of waiting. At about 1:14 p.m., reports that the Learjet is starting to spiral. So one of the engines, apparently, okay, here's another thing we didn't talk about. We always talk about passenger jets having cockpit voice recorders and, instrument recorders. Well, the Learjet does have a cockpit voice recorder. However, it only records for 30 minutes. At the end of 30 minutes, it starts recording the next 30 minutes. So you only have the last 30 minutes of the flight recorded. So we don't know what happened 2 hours prior to cause the problem. What the voice recorder did record was the sound of the engine spooling down, running out of fuel, and at that point, the flight control system, autopilot, tried to keep the airplane at altitude and keep it going on the same direction. Well, it caused the aircraft to stall, and it banked out, and it rolled into a spiral. At 1:16 p.m., the pilots of the F-16s reported spiraling through clouds. At 1:20 p.m., contact lost. It was falling so fast that they couldn't even keep up with it. And at 1:24 p.m., there was a report of a possible field on fire, 2 farmers on the ground investigating. And at that point, it was almost supersonic when it hit the ground. It was just, straight into the ground. And by 1:36, the F-16s turn around and go home because there's nothing else they can do. Excuse me.
What a terrible feeling to have, be so close and yet so far.
Well, exactly. There's nothing you can do other than watch.
I seem to remember feeling and hearing that a lot of people weren't really familiar with this ever happening before, and the fact that it was a famous person meant that it got an awful lot of attention, but it was such a helpless thing because it was tracked on the news for, seems to me, over 2 hours before that final dive. And again, the helplessness. There was some talk about whether if it was going to approach a populated city, if they might have to try to bring the plane down somehow, which was dismissed and not particularly seriously considered. But, those pilots who were up there to check it out, that they were wishing that they had something else that they could report. But, 4 hours in, those people were very, very deceased at that point. And there was nothing they could do except just watch helplessly as it came down. And, broke a lot of hearts that day, of course.
Yeah, absolutely. And he was, not long after this incident, he was inducted into the Texas Sports Hall of Fame in 2000.
Yeah, there are some monuments. There's a very famous sculpture of him at Pinehurst,
Scotland.
Yeah, that's just, it's a great sculpture of him celebrating his win. And, he's, like you said, a lot of people loved him. He made an impact in his life on the golfing community. And, in researching this, there's still people that talk about it. The anniversary of that was just, a while back, not long ago. And there were several articles that I found, bringing that back up, that he has not left people's memory yet.
No, that's for sure.
His funeral memorial service was extremely touching, and I had a conversation about it with my father at the time. It made an incredible impression on my dad, who was very moved. They had a lone piper that played the song "Coming Home." And if you know that song, it's a familiar song and sounds wonderful on bagpipes. But coming out of the mist and fog on a golf course, this piper came out and just appeared with that lonesome single piper. That music is just beautiful. And my father was so moved by it, he said, "I want that played at my funeral," because it just it really was a very touching thing. The memories of all the golfers who showed up to honor him with a rather unique display the 21 gun salute that they did actually with 21 golfers teeing off in unison to honor Payne Stewart. I mean, he was an extremely popular guy, and very much this tragedy affected people in the golf world, of course, but folks all across the country and all across the world who loved him as a person and appreciated his competitiveness, his spirit, his sense of fun, and his winning golf, because he was something else.
As a matter of fact, I read a couple of things that people were saying he had one of the smoothest swings in golf that they had seen, that he was really, his mechanics must have been really good. I'm not a golfer, but when you see that reported multiple times, then obviously, he had a good swing.
Unfortunately, I am a golfer, and yes, there's a lot of people try to imitate that swing even today.
Well, Dave Gorman, you really hit the nail on the head. That must have been a moving funeral or memorial service. These events hit very hard the aviation community, and not only did that aircraft impact the Earth with a large force, but it also hit our hearts, which moves the industry to take action to prevent such tragedies from repeating themselves. And to that effect, the Federal Aviation Administration and other international aviation authorities have taken steps to investigate cabin pressure systems and as well as oxygen systems on board aircraft to prevent these types of tragedies from repeating themselves. And so in a scenario like this, we look at, it brings to mind SMS, safety management systems, and they can use several different analogies to investigate accidents, including the Swiss cheese analysis, the fishbone analysis, and the bow tie analysis, which are different types of accident investigation protocols in order to identify the root cause and to put in policies in place to prevent accidents from repeating themselves. And this is a very distinct and very interesting study in the aviation industry that is not often talked about. So accidents are getting less and less, but when an accident does happen, there's a strong investigation team that comes to place to investigate those accidents to prevent them from repeating themselves.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, that's one of the things in reading some of the post-crash investigation. The company that owned the jet was called Sunjet Aviation, and they came under some really heavy scrutiny about their maintenance practices and actually documenting the things that were done, because this Learjet that Payne Stewart was on had actually had a couple of squawks previously about pressurization that were not adequately investigated. Maintenance did not complete proper investigations. From what I understand, that the cabin would not hold pressure. Maintenance checked on it on the ground and could not replicate the problem. So they just didn't fix it. They didn't investigate further. Another thing that Sunjet was doing was the pilots were supposed to write down, hey, this jet is having this problem, and hand it to the maintenance people, and then it would be filed and people would follow up. Well, that was not happening. It was just verbal. The pilots would get off the plane and say, hey, X is not working, go fix it. And when the maintenance people fixed it, they would actually write down fixed X on this jet. Well, that's not proper paperwork. And because of this inadequate maintenance routines, Sunjet was sued out of existence. They no longer fly because they were just not doing the proper maintenance. But, we don't know what caused this plane to crash. So it's just supposition at this point. Was it a maintenance issue? Was it something that just broke that we don't know? And because the plane was destroyed in the crash, You can't find out. You can't come to a conclusive answer. Uh, the NTSB's final report was basically, uh, you know, probable cause of the accident was incapacitation of the flight crew members as a result of their failure receive supplemental oxygen following a loss of cabin pressurization for undetermined reasons. And that's where we stand. Is it will we'll never exactly know what
Never
happened.
know.
But again, make sure that maintenance is being done properly, so that it's not something that didn't do that causes the accident. Stay on top of that stuff. That's, so important in aviation because, it's an unforgiving environment at 40,000 feet.
It definitely is. And as we jump into closing thoughts, I'll start with you, Julien, since you're sitting right next to me. Go ahead, bud.
Well, I'm so glad to be participating on this podcast, and I just can't believe that I'm here in Tennessee doing this live with you. This is just such an honor and a privilege. I can't imagine.
Appreciate you, buddy.
Be here. And so the industry has responded to mitigate and prevent these incidents from repeating themselves with proper communication, documentation, and maintenance standards and follow-up. And so these are always the things that we learn from these types of accidents.
Definitely. Dave Gorman, closing thoughts on the Learjet crash?
Yeah, again, this one was such a. I remember a lot about that day and watching it, and just that absolute feeling of hopelessness and a bittersweet memory of talking about the funeral, the memorial service with the song "Going Home." Talking about that with my dad afterwards, and then several years later, once my father passed, playing that for him. Payne Stewart was an everyman kind of guy. He wasn't big and flashy, but he took care of business. He had an incredible sense of style and was successful at everything he was doing. Was definitely on a great trajectory as a golfer, but even more as a person. And I grieve for his family and his friends and survivors who miss him and treasure him. And as Julien so aptly put it, hopefully we've learned what we can learn. David said there's a lot of questions still about what caused this to happen. And hopefully those episodes are few and far between.
David Rowe.
Yeah, 100%. We hate that these things happen. We, feel terribly, terribly sorry for everyone that was involved, and just hope that we don't see this happen again. Do that maintenance, stay on top of things, and mitigate as much as possible. Because hypoxia is not something to mess around with. It will bite you, and it will bite you hard. Couple of notes here that I've got for Did You Know?
All right.
Dave, you mentioned taking the jet down. There was actually thought about that by the Canadian Prime Minister, Jean Chrétien. I'm not sure how to say that last name. But he authorized the Canadian Air Force's command to shoot down that plane if it enters Canadian airspace with no contact. So the plane was heading toward the city of Winnipeg, and the air traffic controllers feared that it would crash into the Manitoba capital. I was asked to give permission for the military to bring down the plane if that became necessary. With a heavy heart, I authorized the procedure. So there was serious thought about bringing that jet down before it got to a, populated area. So we, it was just luck that it landed in the middle of a field, which is it's another thing we didn't talk about. There is actually a memorial at the spot where the plane crashed, with a piece of stone that was disturbed by the crash. It has been engraved with all the names of the people on board, and I think there's a whole acre that's blocked off that's just for that memorial. And from what I read, people to this day go and visit that site to see it. So yeah, it's Payne Stewart has not left our consciousness at all. So speaking of Payne Stewart, a couple of did you knows. At the time of his death, Payne Stewart was third on the all-time career earnings list. So yes, he was a good golfer. He was way up there in earnings.
11 million?
Yeah.
You have the
Yeah,
exact
something like
number?
that.
Yeah, 11 something million.
Yeah, something like that. And finally, the PGA, they created the Payne Stewart Award, which is given annually to a player sharing Payne's respect for the traditions of the game, his commitment to uphold the game's heritage of charitable support, and his professional and meticulous presentation of himself and the sport through his dress and conduct. So every year, Payne Stewart, there's an award given out for those folks that are worthy of being a Payne Stewart awardee.
Definitely gone, but never will be forgotten. David Rowe, you said since we mentioned earlier that Julien came down to Tennessee and brought some Canadian weather, you've been working on some aerofoil stuff.
I have, as usual, I have a backlog of aerofoil photos and videos. And, since I'm cooped up indoors, it's too cold to go in the basement and work on things. I've been working on a lot of aerofoil videos. Got 14 or 15 from the Warbirds over Monroe Air Show that I'm just now finishing up. I've got some photos from when Bruce and I took a trip down to Florida. I've got pictures on my aerofoil website from Hurlburt Field, from the Pensacola Blue Angels Homecoming Air Show. I'm working on some Southern Aviation Museum photos. I've about got those finished. So I've got a lot of stuff that's going to be coming out on my aerofoil social and website, YouTube, Instagram. So please come check me out.
Dave Gorman, what do you got going on the old social media side?
Well, I plan on watching a bunch of videos on aerofoil. I don't know about you guys, but that's going to keep me busy too. So I wish I had half as much as Mr. Rowe has, but I'm in a bit of a drought as far as aviation goes lately. So nothing new to add, but looking forward to, again, seeing some of what he's seen and get his views on everything. I'll stay busy, I'm sure, with that.
Oh, definitely. And I appreciate it, guys.
Yeah, that was a sad but interesting podcast today.
Very much so. And I'm going to end with the guy sitting right here next to me. Julien, we appreciate you coming down to Tennessee and seeing us.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure to be here. And the people are so friendly. And I'm just so impressed because everybody just keeps calling me sweetie, and I just can't get over it.
I don't think you'll get any of that from us.
Yeah, you look good. You look good in that shirt there, honey. So
yeah, as long as someone doesn't come up to you and say "bless your heart," then you know
something's wrong.
Then you know something's wrong.
Yeah, now you're in trouble. Something.
If somebody down there comes up to you and says, "Oh, bless your heart," they think you're a silly goose, and that's putting it politely.
That's it.
So, Julien, where can folks get a hold of you to get some aviation coaching and get a hold of your books?
So I recently came out with 2 books, The Ultimate Guide to Careers in Aviation, and my second book was called Mediocrity is Killing Your Superpower, which is based on my TED Talk, and it's available on Amazon. And I'm in the new year, I'm planning on writing a book on airline careers and opportunities. For those who are interested in pursuing a careers in aviation, check out my website, www.julienmartinson.com, and I invite you to follow me on social media, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn.
Definitely appreciate you, buddy, and definitely enjoyed it, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Yep. Talk to you soon.
For David Rowe, Dave Gorman, Julien Martinson, Shae Jones producing, I'm Derrick Beeler. Thanks for listening to the History of Aviation podcast.